Greetings, I'm Tom Bankston, publisher of BankBeat.biz and BankBeat Magazine. Welcome to our BankBeat.biz Quick Takes video blog. Today we're very fortunate to have with us Brian Love, who's with the Travillian Group. That's a national recruiting firm. Brian focuses specifically on banks across the country. Brian, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure to be here, Tom.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You bet. Let's get right into the questions. What are you hearing from customers as you talk to them across the country? Very unusual time.
Yeah, so obviously my primary business line is community banking, diversified financials, and I am seeing across the board an anxiety about credit quality. That's a huge piece. I think the average is a third of my customers' loan portfolios are on deferrals. But that's obvious, and still we don't really know exactly how that will play out over the coming months. But technology has created a lot of worry as well, because these are banks that had to virtualize and become remote for up to 95% of their workforce literally overnight when some of the lockdowns began. And I heard stories across the board of it being easy because they were already set up that way, or they could go quickly into that. And then I've heard stories of banks taking giant PC towers home with them, and it's a mess. But most banks have gotten it done. So it's easy to speak negatively right now, but it really is an opportunistic moment for a lot of banks. And in my perspective, with recruitment being what I focus on, I think there's two distinct categories that banks are actually being aggressive in their recruitment right now, or they should be. One is technology. They were, there was a little bit of a reactive mindset around what they just went through. And even with the integration of that PPP program as well, I think a lot of them were exposed a little for not having terrific technological talent. So that bank that was going to put on a CTO or a CIO, next year is now looking now. And then the other piece, Tom, is around production talent, because a lot of the bigger banks and regional players did not deliver this PPP program in a way that their business customers appreciated, and it left those lenders kind of high and dry. So a lot of my community bank clients might be able to land these production roles when they never thought they'd be able to get talent like this. Also, bonuses are going to be down across the board, so you might be able to hire these folks in a more cost-effective way and bring them aboard.
That's very interesting to think about these times as one of opportunity. A lot of folks, I think, are kind of hunkering down and just focused on getting through the week, the month, the quarter. But as you're pointing out, it's really an opportunity to look long-term. Oh,
definitely. Yeah, it has been very all hands on deck this last month or so.
Yeah. Well, obviously, many businesses have changed their business practices in order to adapt to this, to the pandemic and shelter in place and all that. Are there some changes that you think that will become part of the permanent landscape of the industry?
Yeah, and there's been so many interesting stories about staffing, about HR practices. You've heard teams that are split up constantly. There's something called platooning, rotations, where people are literally split up from each other because of the virus, the contagious nature of this virus. And that's something, again, it could go on. I'm not sure about permanence, but it's something I think you'll see for quite some time. I even heard one story about a CFO and a CEO that couldn't be in the same building at the same time. This continuity planning, is legit. These are pivotal people in their practice that they don't want to get, have sick at the same time. But I mean, what we're doing right now, this video conferencing, even a year ago, 2 years ago, it was just not as prevalent on such a mainstream basis. And I think you're going to see quite a bit of that, although there's a little bit of Zoom fatigue maybe going on here a month or two in. But I think it's here to stay. In my practice, recruiting talent, we're using this more than we ever have. And I think we're going to continue to do that. And again, some of this is kind of conjecture, Tom, but I think budgetarily, travel spends, hotel spends, airline spends are going to be down across the board for some time. I mean, you think Warren Buffett just sold all of his airline stock.
Right.
I mean, that should tell you everything you need to know. But it could trickle down into, does that bank need that branch anymore? If everyone's gone online, do we need to keep that branch? Do we need to keep that call center if people are working from home? There's a lot of different decisions that could come into play and really change the way banking is over the next, 3 to 5 years. One thing I will say, skill sets that are popping up right now around workout, that's coming back. I think that's something banks, now that they've been through 2 terrible crises over the last 12 years, it's going to, kind of make executives and leaders consider what talents they have at their organizations. And, workout is one of them that's incredibly important during a down economy.
And most banks have just been working fast and furious to keep up with the demand related to the PPP. Do you think there are things managers, senior executives are observing about their staff that will be important as they make plans for the future?
Yeah, and I mean, the short story again is that it's just been so reactive over this last month or two. I don't fault banks for being reactive. I think there are some executives that are maybe a little bit concerned about lost productivity by their colleagues, but for the most part, I think there's been a lot of great success stories about these banks administering, these funds to their communities. I do know that, mentoring, training, development, those things are almost universally on pause right now. And executives in general have been having to assure teams, that their jobs are safe. It's just not the right time, to talk about headcount and things of that nature. A lot of employees just want to know, if I have PTO that I have to use for somebody who's sick or for a child, is my bank there to help me? And for the most part, every bank has stepped up, terrifically. I think outwardly or even subconsciously, banks need to be thinking about succession plan right now, some succession plans across the board. I mean, you think about older employees, older executives that have now been through these 2 cycles. Do they even want to be there anymore? So I do anticipate, the next 12, 18, 24 months, there's going to be a lot of turnover on that upper echelon of banking because of this.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, so many folks are working from home now. And of course, as things return to normal, many of them will come back, but some of them won't. Do you have any data, or have you seen anything that gives us a sense for how many folks may end up working permanently from home?
I wish I had some data. It's too early to kind of understand, but I know that there's there's distinct groups. There's people that, okay, I'll go back when, certain milestone is hit, when we know that there's a vaccine. I really don't know the answer to that. I think there are some people that, kind of found their niche working from home. And I think a lot of banks aren't going to arm wrestle them to come back if they're, really good resources for the bank. I think that still remains to be seen, Tom.
Sure. And community banking is such a personal business, relationship-based. Do you believe that this environment has made that harder, or has this been an environment for community banks to shine in that respect?
Well, I mean, there's no denying the one huge positive around that PPP, as painful as it was for banks to integrate and execute. A lot of those big bank players you've read, in the media, at BankBeat and other, national publications have covered it well. A lot of the big banks really, faltered. And this was a moment where community banks, I think they can kind of coast on some of this momentum. It wasn't perfect, but a lot of the community banks were there and they stepped up when some of the big bank players did not. So I do think that it is going to create momentum for this industry. And there was enough of a personal touch, even if it was through a drive-through or by phone or by video conference or by shaking hands in a parking lot with gloves on. I think community bankers got it done for the most part.
Yeah. And even your business is very much network driven and personal, face-to-face meetings. And now most of that's been shut down. Are you finding that the tools available, Zoom, other video conferencing opportunities, are doing the job? We're losing the benefit of these conferences where there were receptions and lots of opportunities to meet. How significant is the loss of that kind of opportunity?
Well, by the way, the BHCA will be back, and I'll be in Minneapolis or Kansas City or wherever it is. I can't wait. I think we will get back to that, but you think about ball games and large congregations of people, there might be some reluctance over the next year or so. That's a good question, Tom. And there's nothing scientific. I mean, I'll just tell you what I've been doing is really, pushing forth deeper relationships with the people I know in the space. There's a lot of downtime right now for consultants, and a lot of the consultants attend these conferences. And this is a fantastic time for me and my team to reach out to these consultants to educate ourselves about bank technology, about innovation, about raising capital, all sorts of things that come into play in our industry. And that's what we've been doing. I used to be a community banker before I was a recruiter. And Travillian is just aligned to the same thinking that I've had, where it's all about long-term relationships. This is the best moment that we can start pushing out content and illustrating best practices all around the community. And that's what we've done here at Travillian. It's important to relay perspectives from, coast to coast. And we've done that through content, conversation, and video conference.
Well, we're right up against our deadline here, so we're going to bring this to a close. Brian Love, the Travillian Group, thank you for being with us. And everybody who's watching, we look forward to catching you again on the next episode of BankBeat.Biz's Quick Takes video blog.
Thank you, Tom.